Hi there, welcome to Melted Stone, the spot for stories that grab you and won't let you go. If you love drama, surprises, and moments that make you say, no way, you're in the right place. Subscribe and dive into tales full of twists, bold moves, and endings you'll remember. This is Melted Stone, hit the bell, and let's get the story rolling. The first crack of the baton against Ethan's skull sounded like a baseball hitting a brick wall. He'd been driving Route 47 back from a late delivery when the headlights appeared in his mirrors. Two black SUVs boxing him in like wolves cornering prey. The industrial road stretched empty for miles, nothing but abandoned warehouses and dead streetlights. Perfect hunting ground. His delivery van lurched as the first SUV clipped his bumper. Ethan's hands tightened on the wheel, muscle memory from 20 years of driving keeping him steady. But when the second SUV pulled alongside and forced him toward the guardrail, he knew this wasn't road rage. The van's tires screamed against gravel as he skidded to a stop. Steam hissed from the crumpled hood. Through the spider-webbed windshield, he watched four men emerge from the vehicles, black clothes, ski masks, moving with military precision. The driver's door exploded inward. Hands dragged him onto the asphalt, gravel biting into his palms. The cold October air cut through his work shirt like ice water. "Ethan Mills?" The voice came from behind a mask, casual as ordering coffee. "Who's asking?" Ethan spat blood, tasted copper and fear. The first blow caught him across the ribs. Pain shot through his chest like lightning, stealing his breath. The second hit landed square between his shoulder blades, driving him to his knees. Wrong answer. The baton came down again, and again. Each impact sent shockwaves through his bones, turning his vision white around the edges. He tried to curl into a ball, protect his head, but they were professionals. They knew exactly where to hit to cause maximum pain without killing him. Through the haze of agony, something glinted in the sodium light. A watch, gold Belova with a scratched face. Rick's watch. The same one he'd worn to Ethan's wedding 3 years ago, standing at the altar as best man while Ethan kissed Marissa for the first time as husband and wife. "Santoro sends his regards." The words cut through the pain cleaner than any blade. Rick Santoro, his former best friend, the man who'd grown up 3 houses down, who'd been there for every milestone, every heartbreak, every triumph, the man Ethan had trusted with his life. The beating stopped as suddenly as it began. Footsteps crunched on gravel, car doors slammed, engines roared to life. Red taillights disappeared into the darkness, leaving Ethan alone with the taste of blood and the sound of his own ragged breathing. Rain began to fall, each drop hitting his battered skin like tiny hammers. He lay there for what felt like hours, staring at the underside of his van's chassis, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The pain was a living thing now, crawling through his body with each heartbeat. His phone. Where was his phone? Ethan rolled onto his side, agony shooting through his ribs. His phone lay shattered 10 feet away, screen dark as the night sky. He dragged himself toward it on his belly, leaving a trail of blood on the wet asphalt. The emergency call took 3 tries to connect. His voice came out as a whisper. "I need an ambulance. Route 47, mile marker 32. I've been attacked." The dispatcher's voice seemed to come from underwater. Sir, can you hear me? Stay on the line." But Ethan was already drifting, the rain washing his blood into the storm drains, carrying pieces of his old life away with it. He woke to the smell of disinfectant and the steady beep of machines. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry insects. His body felt like it had been taken apart and reassembled by someone reading the instructions upside down. "You're awake." A woman's voice, professional but not unkind. Ethan turned his head, wincing at the sharp pain in his neck. A middle-aged woman sat in the visitor's chair, wearing a rumpled gray coat and the tired expression of someone who'd seen too much. Her badge hung from a lanyard around her neck. FBI. "Agent Dana Morell," she said, pulling out a notebook. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck." His voice came out as a croak. "Close. According to the EMTs, you took a professional beating. Batons, probably. Multiple contusions, 2 cracked ribs, concussion." She flipped through her notes. "This wasn't random, Mr. Mills." Ethan stared at the water stain on the ceiling tile above his bed. It looked like a map of somewhere he'd never been, somewhere far from here. "The name Rick Santoro mean anything to you?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Ethan knew she was watching his face, looking for tells, reading micro expressions the way he read engine codes. But 20 years of running his own business had taught him to keep his cards close. Should it? Agent Morrell leaned forward. We've been building a case against Santoro for 2 years. Money laundering, racketeering, assault. He runs security for Victor Castellano's operations. Clubs, restaurants, a few other businesses that don't quite add up on paper. She pulled out a photograph and placed it on the bed table. Rick, caught in telephoto from across a parking lot, shaking hands with a man Ethan didn't recognize. Someone wanted you hurt, Mr. Mills. Someone with connections. Help us figure out who, and we can make sure it doesn't happen again. Ethan studied the photograph without picking it up. Rick looked older, harder around the eyes. The boy who used to steal comic books and share his lunch money was gone, replaced by something colder. I run a delivery service, fix small engines on the side. I don't know anything about money laundering. But you know Rick Santoro. I knew Rick Santoro, past tense. Ethan closed his eyes. We haven't spoken in over a year. Why not? The answer sat in his throat like a stone. Because my wife started working late, because she started smiling at her phone, because she started wearing perfume to run errands, because I followed her one night and saw her get into Rick's car. People drift apart. Agent Morrell studied him for a long moment, then tucked the photograph back into her coat. My card's on the table. When you're ready to talk, really talk, call me. She was almost to the door when Ethan spoke again. The watch. What watch? One of them was wearing a gold Belova, scratched crystal at the 2 o'clock position. Rick's watch. Agent Morrell turned back, pen already in her hand. You sure about that? Ethan met her eyes. I gave it to him for his 30th birthday. Had his initials engraved on the back. RJS Richard James Santoro. She wrote it down, underlining something twice. Mr. Mills, if Rick Santoro ordered this beating, he's escalating. Men like him don't usually stop at sending messages. Then I guess I better learn to send some of my own. The hospital released him 2 days later with a bottle of pain pills and instructions to take it easy. Ethan drove his backup truck to the garage, dreading what he might find. Mills' delivery sat in an industrial park on the east side of town, wedged between a metal fabrication shop and a tire store. Ethan had bought the building 8 years ago, back when he still believed hard work and honest dealing were enough. The sign out front was faded but legible. Same-day service, fair prices. The bay doors had been pried open. His tools were gone. The pneumatic lifts, the diagnostic equipment, even the coffee maker from his small office. They'd taken everything that wasn't bolted down, and some things that were. Javier's pickup truck pulled into the parking lot as Ethan stood surveying the damage. His only employee was 23, reliable, and one of the few people Ethan trusted completely. Jesus, boss. Javier climbed out of his truck, shaking his head. I heard about what happened. You okay? Been better. Ethan kicked at a piece of broken glass. They clean us out? Pretty much. But I got the delivery logs and customer files from my truck before they could grab them, and the insurance should cover most of the equipment. Ethan nodded, grateful. Javier had worked for him for 3 years, ever since graduating from community college with a degree in automotive technology. The kid was smart, dependable, and didn't ask too many questions about why his boss sometimes came in with bruised knuckles or why certain customers paid in cash. You see anything when it happened? Javier glanced around, making sure they were alone. I was coming back from the Martinez delivery Tuesday night. Saw Marissa at Vic's nightclub downtown. She was with Rick. The words hit Ethan like a punch to the solar plexus. He'd known about the affair for months, but hearing it confirmed still felt like stepping on broken glass. How close were they? Close. Her hand on his arm, laughing at everything he said. They looked comfortable together. Ethan walked to his destroyed office, Javier following. The desk had been overturned, papers scattered everywhere, but the safe in the floor was still intact, too heavy to move, too well hidden to find easily. He spun the combination and pulled out a small metal box. Inside were backup hard drives, business records, and a micro SD card he'd almost forgotten about. What's that? Insurance. Ethan pocketed the card. Different kind than what Allstate sells. That evening, alone in his apartment, Ethan slotted the SD card into his laptop. The footage was from his delivery van's dash cam, 6 months of routine drives, customer deliveries, and one very interesting recording from a night in August. He'd been working late, finishing a rush job for a restaurant supply company. Marissa had called to say she was staying over at her sister's place after girls' night. But as he loaded the van for the next day's deliveries, he'd seen her car pull into the parking lot of Romano's Steakhouse across the street. The dash cam had been recording automatically, its wide-angle lens capturing the restaurant's front entrance. At 11:47 p.m., Marissa emerged with Rick, his arm around her waist. They kissed under the neon sign before getting into Rick's BMW. Ethan had watched this footage dozens of times, each viewing feeling like picking at a scab. But tonight, he noticed something different. As Rick's car pulled away, another vehicle followed, a black SUV with fleet plates. The image was grainy, but he could make out part of the license number. He took a screenshot and enhanced it using free software he'd downloaded. The partial plate read PD something something 7, Police Department Fleet Vehicle. Rick had cops on his payroll. That explained how he'd stayed ahead of Agent Morell's investigation for 2 years. It also explained how he'd known exactly where to find Ethan on that empty road. Ethan printed the screenshot and tucked it into his wallet. Then he opened his laptop's browser and began researching Victor Castellano. Vic owned 6 legitimate businesses in the city: 2 restaurants, a nightclub, a car wash, a construction company, and a shipping firm. On paper, he was a successful entrepreneur who'd built his empire from nothing. But the online forums told a different story. Anonymous posts from former employees hinted at cash payments, suspicious shipments, and customers who paid for services that were never clearly defined. The health department had cited his restaurants multiple times, but the violations always disappeared. The construction company won city contracts despite not being the lowest bidder. It was the shipping firm that caught Ethan's attention. Castellano Import-Export operated out of a warehouse near the port, handling cargo from Central America. According to public records, they specialized in miscellaneous goods and employed exactly 3 people. But satellite imagery showed dozens of trucks coming and going at all hours. Ethan made notes, building a picture of Rick's world: money laundering through the restaurants, drugs or contraband through the shipping company, protection and enforcement through Rick's security team. It was a small but efficient operation, the kind that could fly under the radar for years if managed carefully. But everything had weak points. The key was finding them. He closed the laptop and walked to his kitchen window. The city spread out below him, 10 million lights in the darkness. Somewhere out there, Rick and Marissa were probably together, thinking they'd solved their Ethan problem permanently. They were wrong. The next morning, Ethan drove to Romano's steakhouse. The lunch crowd was light. A few business meetings, couples sharing appetizers, regulars at the bar watching ESPN. He ordered coffee and sat in a corner booth where he could watch the entrance. Rick arrived at 1:15 p.m., alone. He looked good. Expensive suit, fresh haircut, the confidence of a man who'd never worried about making rent. He took a table near the window and ordered his usual: Caesar salad, no croutons, dressing on the side. Ethan waited until Rick was halfway through his meal, then walked over. "Mind if I join you?" Rick looked up, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. For a split second, surprise flickered across his face. Then the mask slipped back into place. "Ethan, heard you had an accident?" Funny thing about accidents. Sometimes they're not accidents at all. Ethan sat down without being invited. The server started to approach, but something in his expression made her change direction. "You look good for someone who got jumped by random thugs," Rick said, cutting a piece of lettuce with surgical precision. "Amazing what modern medicine can do. Couple days in the hospital, some pain pills, good as new." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Well, almost as good. I did lose something in the attack." "Oh?" "My faith in old friends." Rick's chewing slowed. "That's too bad. Faith's important. So is trust. But I guess you learn who you can really count on when the chips are down." They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the restaurant filling the space between them. Clinking glasses, muffled conversations, the hiss of the espresso machine. "Marissa asks about you sometimes," Rick said finally. "I bet she does. She's worried. Says you've been distant lately." Ethan pulled a napkin from the dispenser and wrote on it with a pen from his pocket. He slid it across the table and stood up. "Tell her not to worry. I'm doing just fine." Rick unfolded the napkin and read, 3 SUVs, 2 batons, 1 watch, see you soon." By the time he looked up, Ethan was gone. That evening, Rick sat in his office above Vic's nightclub, staring at the napkin. Through the floor, he could feel the bass line of whatever song was playing downstairs, a steady thump that matched his heartbeat. The office was all dark wood and leather, Vic's idea of what a successful man's workspace should look like. Awards and photographs covered one wall, documenting the construction of Vic's legitimate empire. The other wall held security monitors showing feeds from all 6 businesses. Rick had been handling security for Vic for 3 years, ever since his stint with the police department ended badly. The work was simple: keep problems away from Vic's operations, handle disputes that couldn't go through official channels, make sure everyone understood the rules. The Ethan situation had started as a routine problem. Marissa had come to Rick 6 months ago, scared and guilty and looking for a way out of her marriage. She'd gotten involved with Rick during one of her fights with Ethan. One thing led to another, and suddenly she was in deeper than she'd intended. "He's suspicious," she'd said, crying in Rick's car after another tense dinner at home. "He asks questions about where I've been, who I've talked to. I think he's following me." Rick had promised to handle it. A quiet conversation, maybe a friendly warning to back off. But when he approached Ethan at a bar, his former friend had made it clear the conversation was over before it started. "Stay away from my wife," Ethan had said, his voice calm but his eyes promising violence. "And stay away from me." That should have been the end of it. Rick had plenty of other problems to worry about. Agent Morell's investigation, Vic's increasing paranoia, competition from other crews moving into their territory. But Marissa kept pushing, kept insisting that Ethan was getting closer to the truth. "He knows about us," she'd whispered last week, her hand clutching Rick's arm as they sat in his BMW outside her apartment. "I can see it in the way he looks at me. He's planning something." So Rick had made a decision. Quick, clean, professional. Scare Ethan badly enough to make him back down permanently. But looking at the napkin now, he realized he'd miscalculated. Ethan wasn't backing down. He was declaring war. Rick picked up his phone and dialed a familiar number. "It's me," he said when Vic answered. "We might have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The Ethan Mills situation. It's not resolved." There was a pause. Through the phone, Rick could hear jazz music and the clink of glasses. Vic was at Romano's, probably having his usual late dinner. "I thought you handled that." "I did, but he's still making noise." "Then handle it better." The line went dead. Rick stared at his phone, feeling the familiar weight of Vic's expectations. In Vic's world, problems had one solution. They disappeared. It didn't matter if the problem was a business rival, a nosy reporter, or a betrayed husband who wouldn't take a hint. Rick folded the napkin and put it in his desk drawer. Tomorrow he'd make some calls, put together a more permanent solution. But tonight, he had other concerns. Marissa was waiting for him at his apartment, wearing the red dress he'd bought her and that nervous smile she got when she wanted something. "How was work?" she asked, pouring him a glass of wine. "Fine. Had lunch at Romano's." "Oh? Anyone I know?" Rick studied her face, looking for signs of deception. But Marissa had always been good at lying. To her husband, to herself, and sometimes to him. "Just business." She nodded and curled up beside him on the couch, her head on his shoulder. They watched the news in comfortable silence, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest. The lead story was about the mayor's budget proposal, nothing about beaten delivery drivers or federal investigations. "Rick?" Marissa's voice was soft, almost childlike. "When this is all over, when the divorce is final, we'll be together, right? Really together?" "Of course. I mean it. I'm not going back to him, no matter what happens." Rick kissed the top of her head, smelling her familiar perfume. "Nothing's going to happen. Everything's under control." But even as he said it, he was thinking about the napkin in his desk drawer and the promise it represented. Ethan Mills had always been stubborn, even as a kid. When they were 12, Ethan had spent an entire summer teaching himself to skateboard after Rick had said he'd never learn. When they were in high school, Ethan had worked 2 jobs to buy his first car while Rick borrowed money from his parents. Now Ethan was applying that same determination to something much more dangerous. Rick reached for his phone and scrolled through his contacts. He had people who could make problems disappear permanently. It would cost more than a simple beating, and Vic wouldn't like the additional expense, but some problems were worth the investment. He was about to make the call when Marissa shifted in his arms. "I love you," she murmured, half asleep. Rick looked down at her face, peaceful and trusting in the lamplight. She'd left everything for him, her marriage, her security, her comfortable middle-class life. The least he could do was keep her safe. He deleted the contact and put his phone away. There had to be another solution, something that would neutralize Ethan without escalating to murder. Rick was a professional, not a psychopath. He'd find another way. But first, he needed to know exactly what Ethan was planning. The next morning, Ethan met Agent Morell at a diner on the north side of town. She was already there when he arrived, sitting in a back booth with a cup of coffee and a manila folder. "You look better," she said as he slid into the opposite seat. "Healing fast." Ethan ordered coffee from the waitress and waited until she was gone before continuing. "I've been thinking about our conversation." "And?" Rick Santoro ordered the beating. "I'm sure of it now." Agent Morell opened her folder and pulled out a photograph. Rick shaking hands with a man in an expensive suit outside a warehouse. "Victor Castellano," she said. "Rick's boss. We've been trying to build a case against Vic for 2 years, but he's careful. Everything goes through intermediaries, all the money gets laundered through legitimate businesses. We know he's dirty, but proving it in court is another matter." Ethan studied the photograph. Vic looked like a successful businessman, well-dressed, confident, the kind of man who belonged in boardrooms and country clubs. It was hard to believe he was running a criminal organization. What do you need to make a case? Evidence, financial records, witness testimony, recorded conversations, the kind of proof that sticks in federal court. Agent Morell leaned forward. "Rick's your way in. He knows where the bodies are buried. And you want me to get close to him? I want you to be careful. Men like Rick don't hesitate to eliminate threats." She paused, studying his face. "But if you're determined to go after him anyway, we might be able to help each other." Ethan sipped his coffee, thinking. Agent Morell was offering him the resources of the federal government, surveillance, protection, legal immunity, but she was also asking him to become an informant, to betray the man who'd once been his closest friend. What's the timeline? "We're hoping to move within 6 months. Any longer and Vic might relocate his operations." "And Rick? If he cooperates, he might avoid serious prison time. If he doesn't," she shrugged, "RICO charges carry 20 years minimum." Ethan thought about Rick in federal prison, wearing orange jumpsuit instead of expensive suits. The image should have given him satisfaction, but it only made him feel hollow. "I'll need guarantees, my safety, my business, my freedom to operate, within reason. And Marissa stays out of it unless she's directly involved in criminal activity." Agent Morell raised an eyebrow. "Generous of you." "She made her choice, but I won't be the reason she goes to prison for it." They spent another hour working out details. Agent Morell would provide backup surveillance and legal protection. Ethan would document his interactions with Rick and report any criminal activity. If things went well, they'd have enough evidence to bring down Vic's entire operation within 6 months. If things went badly, Ethan would end up like the other people who'd crossed Rick Santoro, permanently silenced. As he drove back to the garage, Ethan's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Lunch today. Romano's, 1 p.m. Come alone. Rick." Ethan deleted the message and kept driving. He had work to do before lunch. Equipment to order, insurance claims to file, a business to rebuild. But more importantly, he had a war to plan. The garage was busier than it had been in weeks. Word was getting around that Mills Delivery was back in business, and customers were trickling in with jobs they'd been saving up. Javier had worked through the night, installing replacement equipment and organizing the workspace. "Got a call from Peterson Construction," Javier said, handing Ethan a work order. "They need 50 bags of concrete mix delivered to the Riverside project by 3 o'clock. That's cutting it close." "I can handle it. Truck's loaded and ready." Ethan nodded, grateful again for Javier's loyalty. The kid could have found another job after the break-in, somewhere safer and more stable. Instead, he'd stuck around and worked twice as hard to get the business running again. "Be careful out there. Watch your mirrors. Vary your routes. If anything feels wrong, call me immediately." Javier grinned. "You sound like my mother." "Your mother's a smart woman." At 12:45, Ethan walked into Romano's. Rick was already there, sitting at the same table as yesterday. But this time, he wasn't alone. 2 men in dark suits sat at nearby tables, their eyes constantly scanning the room. Ethan ignored them and sat down across from Rick. "You brought friends. Insurance policy, nothing personal." "Everything about this is personal." Rick signaled the waitress and ordered 2 coffees without asking what Ethan wanted. It was a small power play, the kind of dominance game they'd played as kids, but with much higher stakes now. "I got your note," Rick said when they were alone again. "Thought you might." "It was a mistake coming here yesterday. You're emotional, not thinking clearly." "I understand why. Hell, I'd probably feel the same way in your position. But this has to stop." Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying Rick's face. They'd known each other for 30 years, and he could still read most of Rick's tells. The slight tightness around his eyes meant he was worried. The way he kept adjusting his tie meant he was improvising rather than following a plan. What has to stop? The threats, the games, this whole revenge fantasy you're playing out. Is that what this is? Look, I'm sorry about what happened to you. The beating, the break-in, all of it. That got out of hand, and I take responsibility. Ethan felt something cold settle in his chest. You take responsibility. It was supposed to be a warning, nothing more. Just enough to make you back off and stop asking questions about Marissa. Stop asking questions about my wife. Your ex-wife. She filed papers yesterday. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He'd known the divorce was coming, had been expecting it for months. But hearing it from Rick, delivered with casual cruelty, made it real in a way that hurt worse than any beating. Congratulations, Ethan said quietly. It doesn't have to be ugly. Marissa wants a clean split. No fighting over assets, no custody issues since you don't have kids. You keep the business, she keeps the apartment, everyone moves on. And you get the girl. Rick didn't deny it. We didn't plan for it to happen, but sometimes these things just... bullshit. The word came out louder than Ethan had intended. Conversations at nearby tables paused as people turned to look. Rick's security team tensed, hands moving toward concealed weapons. Rick held up a hand, a subtle signal for everyone to stay calm. Keep your voice down. How long? Ethan asked. How long have you been screwing my wife? That's not... How long, Rick? Rick was quiet for a long moment, staring at his coffee cup. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. 8 months. 8 months. While Ethan had been working 16-hour days to build the business, while he'd been trusting Rick with everything, his friendship, his secrets, his marriage. Why? It just happened. She was lonely, you were always working. We started talking, one thing led to another. That's not what I meant. Ethan leaned forward, his voice deadly quiet. Why did you have me beaten? Why not just talk to me man to man? Rick met his eyes for the first time since he'd sat down. Because I know you, Ethan. You don't give up. You don't compromise. If I'd told you about Marissa, you would have fought for her, made things messy and complicated. So you decided to have me crippled instead. It wasn't supposed to go that far. Just a message, a warning to back off. Whose idea was it? Yours or Vic's? Rick's face went pale. How do you know about Vic? I know a lot of things. Like the fact that you're laundering money through Romano's. That Vic's shipping company brings in more than miscellaneous goods. That half the cops in this city are on your payroll. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Ethan pulled out his phone and showed Rick a photograph. Vic shaking hands with a man outside the shipping warehouse. Recognize him? FBI took this picture last month. Rick grabbed for the phone, but Ethan was faster, pulling it back out of reach. Careful, Ethan said. We're in public. Where did you get that? Does it matter? The point is, your little empire is crumbling. The feds are closing in, and when they do, everyone goes down together. Unless what? Ethan put his phone away and stood up. Unless someone smart enough to see the writing on the wall decides to save himself. He threw a $5 bill on the table and walked toward the exit. Rick's security team started to follow, but Rick waved them off. This isn't over, Rick called after him. Ethan paused at the door and looked back. No, it's not, but it will be soon. That night, Rick sat in his BMW outside Marissa's apartment, trying to decide what to tell her. Through her living room window, he could see her moving around, probably cooking dinner. She'd been excited about the divorce papers, talking about their future together like they were planning a vacation instead of destroying lives. His phone rang. Vic's name appeared on the screen. Yeah? We need to talk. My office. 10 minutes. The line went dead. Rick looked up at Marissa's window one more time, then put the car in drive. Vic's office was darker than usual, lit only by the security monitors and a single desk lamp. Vic sat behind his desk like a judge, his hands folded in front of him. Sit. Rick took the chair across from the desk, feeling like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. Tell me about your lunch today. Ethan knows about us. Not everything, but enough to be dangerous. How much does he know? He mentioned the restaurants, the shipping company, the police connections. He's got FBI surveillance photos. Vic was quiet for a long time, studying Rick's face in the dim light. Finally, he opened a desk drawer and pulled out a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. How long have you worked for me, Rick? 3 years. Vic poured 2 drinks and slid one across the desk. In those 3 years, have I ever asked you to do anything you weren't comfortable with? Rick thought about it. The answer was no, but that was because he'd become comfortable with things he never would have imagined 3 years ago. Breaking legs, intimidating witnesses, making problems disappear. It had been a gradual descent, each step seeming reasonable at the time. No, sir. Have I ever failed to take care of you? Pay you well? Protect you from consequences? No, sir. Then why is this amateur threatening everything we've built? Rick took a sip of whiskey, feeling it burn his throat. He's not an amateur. He's angry and he's smart, and he's got nothing left to lose. Everyone has something to lose. Not Ethan. We took his wife, destroyed his business, put him in the hospital. What else can we threaten him with? Vic stood up and walked to the window overlooking the nightclub's main floor. The music was muffled but still audible, a steady rhythm that seemed to pulse through the building's bones. His life. I'm not killing him, Vic. We were friends. Were, past tense. Vic turned back to face Rick. Friendship is a luxury we can't afford right now. The FBI is building a case and your friend is handing them evidence. How long before he leads them to our door? I can handle him. Like you handled him before. Rick felt his face flush. That was different. This time, I'll do it right. This time, you'll do exactly what I tell you to do. Vic returned to his desk and picked up a manila envelope. Inside this envelope is everything the FBI has on us. Bank records, surveillance photos, witness statements. One of our friends in law enforcement thought we should know what we're up against. Rick opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were dozens of documents, financial statements from Romanos showing suspicious cash deposits, photographs of Vic meeting with known criminals, transcripts of recorded conversations between Rick and various associates. Jesus Christ. They're close, Rick. Closer than we thought, and now your friend is feeding them additional information. Vic sat down and fixed Rick with a stare that could have frozen water. This ends tonight. Permanently. There has to be another way. There is. You disappear. Leave the country. Change your name. Never come back. Let me clean up your mess while you start over in Mexico or Costa Rica. Rick thought about it for a moment. A new identity. A beach somewhere. Enough money to live comfortably for the rest of his life. It was tempting, but it also meant leaving Marissa behind, abandoning the life they'd planned together. I can't do that. Why not? Marissa, I won't leave her. Vic laughed, a sound without humor. You think she'll wait for you? A woman who cheated on her husband will cheat on her lover. Find another woman, Rick, one who isn't connected to this mess. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. Vic opened another drawer and pulled out a pistol, placing it on the desk between them. You have two choices. Kill Ethan Mills tonight, or I'll kill you both and find someone more reliable to handle my security. Rick stared at the gun, its black metal gleaming under the desk lamp. He'd carried weapons before, even used them to intimidate people, but he'd never killed anyone, never crossed that final line. Give me 24 hours, let me try talking to him one more time. You had your chance to talk, it didn't work. Please, Vic, just one day. Vic studied Rick's face for a long moment, then picked up the gun and put it back in the drawer. 12 hours. If Ethan Mills is still breathing tomorrow morning, you both disappear. Permanently. Rick left Vic's office feeling like a condemned man. He sat in his car for 10 minutes, trying to think of options that didn't end with someone dying. But every scenario led to the same conclusion. Either Ethan died, or Rick and Marissa would spend the rest of their lives running from Vic's reach. He drove to Marissa's apartment, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. She answered the door wearing pajamas, and a smile that faded when she saw his expression. What's wrong? We need to leave. Tonight. Pack whatever you can carry and forget the rest. What are you talking about? Rick pushed past her into the apartment, checking the windows for surveillance. Ethan's talking to the FBI. He's got evidence, photographs, recordings. Vic wants him dead, and if I don't do it, we're both targets. Marissa sank onto the couch, her face pale. This is really happening. Pack light. Cash only from now on. I've got enough saved to get us out of the country, but we have to move fast. What about the divorce? My job? My life here? That life is over. Rick knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. I'm sorry, baby. I know this isn't what we planned, but it's the only way. Marissa looked around the apartment, at the photos on the walls, the furniture they'd picked out together, the life she'd built after leaving Ethan. How did it come to this? I made mistakes, trusted the wrong people, got in too deep. Rick squeezed her hands. But I'll protect you. I promise. What about Ethan? The question hung between them like a blade. Rick could lie, tell her they were just running from the FBI, but she deserved to know the truth. Vic wants him dead, tonight. And you're going to do it? Rick didn't answer, but his silence was confirmation enough. Marissa pulled her hands away and stood up, walking to the window. He was a good husband, she said quietly. Boring sometimes, too focused on work. But he loved me, really loved me. And now? Now he hates us both, and maybe he should. Rick came up behind her, putting his arms around her waist. We can't change what we did. We can only decide what happens next. Marissa leaned back against him, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on them both. In a few hours, Rick would have to choose between killing his oldest friend or losing everything he'd worked for. There was no good choice, no path that didn't lead to blood. How long do we have? 12 hours. She turned in his arms, looking up at his face. Then let's not waste them. They made love with desperate intensity, as if they could outrun their choices through sheer physical connection. But when it was over, Rick still had to make the same decision, and Marissa still had to live with whatever he chose. At 3 a.m., Rick dressed quietly and kissed Marissa goodbye. She pretended to be asleep, but he could tell from her breathing that she was awake, listening to him leave. The gun felt heavier than it should have in his jacket pocket. Vic had given him Ethan's address and a key to the building. One of their police contacts had provided it. The plan was simple. Break in, make it look like a burglary gone wrong, disappear. But as Rick drove through the empty streets, he kept thinking about a summer when they were 10 years old. Ethan had fallen off his bike and broken his arm, and Rick had run 6 blocks to get help. They'd spent the rest of the summer building model airplanes and reading comic books while Ethan's arm healed. That boy was still in there somewhere, buried under years of betrayal and violence. The question was whether Rick could kill him. Ethan wasn't asleep when Rick picked the lock on his apartment door. He'd been expecting this visit for hours, sitting in his kitchen with a cup of coffee and Agent Morell's business card. The door opened silently, and Rick slipped inside like a shadow. He moved through the living room carefully, avoiding the squeaky floorboard near the couch, heading toward the bedroom where he expected to find Ethan sleeping. "In here," Ethan called from the kitchen. Rick froze, then slowly walked toward the sound of Ethan's voice. He found his former friend sitting at the small dining table, still dressed, looking like he'd been waiting. "Vic, give you 12 hours or 24? Rick's hand moved toward his jacket, then stopped. "How did you—" "Because I know how these things work. And I know you." Ethan gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Sit. Let's talk. There's nothing to talk about." "Sure there is. Like how you're going to explain to Marissa that you murdered her ex-husband, or how you're going to live with yourself afterwards." Rick remained standing, his hand hovering near the gun. "You brought this on yourself." "Did I? By working 18-hour days to build a business? By trusting my wife and my best friend? By trying to have a normal, honest life? By not knowing when to quit?" Ethan laughed, a sound without humor. "That's rich coming from you. When we were kids, you used to say that was what you admired about me. My stubborn streak." "We're not kids anymore." "No, we're not. We're 2 men who used to be brothers, and now one of us is here to kill the other." Ethan took a sip of coffee. "How did we get here, Rick?" Rick finally sat down, but kept his hand near his weapon. "You know how. I know the facts. What I don't understand is the choice. You could have had any woman in the city. Why did it have to be Marissa?" The question caught Rick off guard. He'd been expecting threats, bargaining, maybe even begging. But not this. Not Ethan trying to understand the betrayal instead of fighting it. "She was lonely. You were always working, never home. She needed someone to talk to. And you were there." "Yeah, I was there." "When did it become more than talking?" Rick closed his eyes, remembering. "Your anniversary dinner. Last year. You had that big contract with Morrison Industries, remember? You worked until 9 o'clock, showed up 2 hours late. The carburetor rebuild. The guy needed it for a delivery the next morning. Marissa called me crying, said she felt like she was married to a ghost. I took her for drinks, let her vent. One thing led to another." Ethan nodded slowly. "And once it started, it was easier to keep going than to stop." Something like that. They sat in silence for a moment, 2 men who'd shared a lifetime of memories and were now facing the end of everything they'd built together. I never meant for it to hurt you, Rick said finally. But it did. But it did. Ethan stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. You know what the funny thing is? I saw it coming months before I could prove it. The late nights, the new clothes, the way she started smiling at her phone. But I kept telling myself I was paranoid. Maybe you should have confronted us sooner. Maybe. Or maybe I should have been a better husband. Ethan turned back to face Rick. But that doesn't justify what happened next. The beating, the break-in, the threats. That was all you. Rick's hand tightened on the gun grip. Vic's orders. Bullshit. Vic doesn't care about love triangles. This was personal, and you know it. You wouldn't let it go. Of course I wouldn't let it go. You stole my wife and then tried to intimidate me into silence. What did you think would happen? The anger in Ethan's voice was controlled but unmistakable. Rick could see the rage burning behind his eyes, carefully banked but ready to explode. I thought you'd be smart enough to walk away. From my own life? From a fight you can't win. Ethan smiled, and for the first time that night, Rick felt genuinely afraid. Who says I can't win? Look around, Ethan. You're alone, broke, beaten. Marissa's filing for divorce, your business is destroyed, and in about 10 minutes you're going to be dead. How is that winning? Because in 10 minutes you're going to make a choice, and whatever you choose, you lose. Rick drew the gun, pointing it at Ethan's chest. Explain that. If you kill me, you become a murderer. Not just muscle for hire, not just a guy who bends the rules. A killer. That changes you, Rick. It changes everything about who you are. And if I don't kill you, then Vic kills us both. Marissa too, probably. Can't leave loose ends. Rick's hand was shaking now, the gun wavering in his grip. There has to be another way. There is, but you won't like it. What? Ethan reached into his pocket slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. He pulled out Agent Morell's business card and placed it on the table. Flip. Testify against Vic. Put him away for 20 years and disappear into witness protection. With Marissa, that's between you and her. But yes, if she wants to go. Rick stared at the card like it was a live snake. You'd do that? After everything? I'd rather see you in prison than dead, and I'd rather see Marissa safe than sorry. Why? Ethan walked back to the table, moving slowly. Rick tracked him with the gun, but didn't fire. Because 30 years ago, you carried me home when I broke my leg jumping off the Millfield Bridge. Because you stood up to Tommy Kowalski when he was bullying me in 7th grade. Because you were my best man at my wedding, even if you ended up stealing the bride. Rick's eyes were wet now, the gun heavy in his hands. I loved her too, you know. Still do. I know, but not enough to let her go. I know that too. Rick lowered the gun, setting it on the table between them. What happens now? Now you call Agent Morell. Tell her you want to make a deal. Give her everything. Names, dates, financial records, the whole operation. And Vic? Vic goes down, along with everyone else who decided that beating innocent people was an acceptable business practice. Rick picked up the business card, reading the FBI seal and phone number. She'll want everything. Every crime, every dirty cop, every illegal dollar. Then give it to her. It'll destroy a lot of lives. Those lives were already destroyed. You just hadn't noticed yet. Rick stood up, leaving the gun on the table. I need to think about this. You have until sunrise. After that, Vic's going to assume you failed and send someone else. Someone who won't hesitate to pull the trigger. Probably not. Rick walked to the door, then stopped. For what it's worth, I am sorry. About Marissa, about the beating, about all of it. I know. Will you forgive me? Ethan was quiet for a long time, considering the question. Ask me again after Vic's in prison. Rick left without another word, taking the gun, but leaving the business card behind. Ethan sat alone in his kitchen until dawn, wondering if he'd just saved his friend's life or signed his own death warrant. At 6 a.m., his phone rang. Agent Morell's voice was crisp and professional. We have Rick Santoro in custody. He wants to make a deal. 3 months later, Ethan stood in the back of a federal courtroom and watched Victor Castellano get sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. The judge read the charges in a monotone voice. Racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy, tax evasion. Vic showed no emotion as the bailiff led him away in shackles. Rick had testified for 3 days, laying out the entire operation in meticulous detail. Bank accounts, shell companies, police corruption, violence for hire. By the time he was finished, the FBI had enough evidence to dismantle organized crime in the city for a generation. As part of his plea agreement, Rick received 5 years in minimum security and a new identity after his release. Marissa had refused witness protection, choosing instead to start over on her own in California. The divorce had been finalized quietly, with no contest from either side. Javier met Ethan outside the courthouse, carrying a manila envelope. "Peterson Construction wants to hire us full-time," he said, handing over the contract. "Exclusive delivery service for all their projects. It's enough work to keep us busy for the next 2 years." Ethan glanced through the paperwork, then signed it against the courthouse steps. "Good. We'll need steady income if we're going to expand." "Expand?" "2 more trucks, maybe 3, a couple of new drivers. There's a lot of opportunity out there for a company with a good reputation." They walked to Ethan's rebuilt delivery van, the same model as before but newer, better equipped. The garage had reopened 2 weeks after Vic's arrest, and business had been booming ever since. Word got around fast in their neighborhood. Mill's delivery was reliable, honest, and not connected to any criminal organizations. As they drove through the city, Ethan thought about Rick sitting in his federal prison cell, probably wondering if the deal had been worth it. 5 years was a long time, but it was better than life without parole. And maybe, when he got out, he'd be ready to start over for real. Agent Morell had called the previous week to thank him for his cooperation. The Castellano case had been a career maker for her, leading to promotion and assignment to a major organized crime task force. She'd offered to stay in touch, but Ethan had politely declined. He was done with federal agents and criminal investigations. "You think we'll ever see Rick again?" Javier asked as they pulled into the garage. "Probably not, and that's probably for the best." "What about Marissa?" Ethan parked the van and turned off the engine. "What about her? Don't you miss her?" It was a fair question. Ethan had loved Marissa for 7 years, married her for 3, but the woman he'd loved had never really existed. She'd been a projection, a fantasy he'd created to fill the empty spaces in his life. "I miss the idea of her. But the real Marissa? The one who could lie to my face for 8 months while sleeping with my best friend? No, I don't miss her." They spent the afternoon loading the van for the next day's deliveries. The work was routine, familiar, peaceful. Ethan had built something good here, an honest business that served his community and employed people who needed work. It wasn't glamorous, but it was his. As the sun set over the city, Ethan locked up the garage and walked to his truck. Tomorrow would bring new customers, new challenges, new opportunities. The past was behind him now, buried under tons of federal paperwork and court transcripts. He'd learned something important over the past year. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. Sometimes it's simply outlasting them, building something better while they tear themselves apart. Rick and Marissa had chosen betrayal, violence, and easy money. They'd ended up with prison, exile, and nothing to show for their choices. Ethan had chosen patience, honesty, and hard work. He'd ended up with his freedom, his integrity, and a future worth looking forward to. As he drove home through the quiet streets, he thought about the kid who used to steal comic books and share his lunch money. That boy was gone forever, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. But maybe that was for the best. Some friendships weren't worth saving, no matter how much history they shared. The city lights stretched out before him like a map of possibilities. Tomorrow would bring new roads to travel, new deliveries to make, new chances to prove that sometimes the good guys really do win in the end. But tonight, Ethan Mills was content to drive slowly through the darkness, listening to the radio and thinking about absolutely nothing at all. The end.